Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this week we're going to be talking about avoiding cliches. But before we do that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup of what we've been doing. Dave, what have you been up to?
Right, I finished the second draft of Adventure. Yes, that's it. Haven't talked about that at all, so I've forgotten what it's called. Finished the redraft of Adventure. I still love it. It's still got a great ending, and everyone should buy it as soon as it's available. Also, did another episode of Seven Stones. The ending of this one really kicked me in the head. I had the first third on Tuesday. Usually, I've got the outline done by Tuesday. Got the first draft written by the end of Wednesday, but I was still working on this one this morning, trying to get the ending to work, because I know where I want the story to go, but I just couldn't get a point about the right length from where I left off that actually had some tension in it. So it was coming out at like 400 words or 2,500 words. I just couldn't get it to go down. So that was fun, but and also relevant for people who've listened to last week's podcast on writing serials.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do just kick you.
I was sick for 3 days, like fever and dizziness and that kind of thing. So I didn't do much writing from Sunday till Tuesday. And then for the rest of the week, I outlined the second half of what I have been calling Personal Gods, but I've now come up with the title Blood Cruel for my vampire book, because I think Blood Cruel says pretty clearly that it's a vampire book, or at least horror related. So I wrote 5,000 words of an outline, which is the second half of the book, and then 7,000 words of first draft for the second half of the book. And I think I came up with some good plot twists and things to go into the second half. So yeah, that went pretty well. So avoiding cliches, the reason I wanted to talk about this was because I'm writing a vampire book, and there's been a lot of vampire books written. So I'm particularly looking to not repeat what has been done over and over and over. Like the thing Twilight did. I know people are pretty down on Twilight, but it was different from a lot of other vampire books that had gone before. It had a lot of the same tropes in some ways. I mean, the romance angle and that kind of thing, but it did try other things. So so I'm also trying to avoid cliches whilst sticking with some tropes, like, for example, vampires have to be invited into someone's home in order to get in there and that kind of thing. I think the most important thing I'd say for avoiding cliches is to not know where it's going yourself. For the most part, you can have an idea, but not know the individual twists and turns and things like that in the story. And then when you get there, you reject the first 5-10 ideas you have until you find one that you go, oh, that's really good. How about you, Dave?
Well, I was thinking is that most writers, most children got into storytelling with changing something. And for some people, it was the end of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, where they burst through the door, the screen goes white, the credits roll. And obviously, in the official story, that's because they've died. But I know lots of people whose first proper storytelling was when they decided, well, they didn't die. Here's what happened next. For other people, it was deciding that Scotty in Star Trek was actually a Federation agent, that he was so ridiculously competent because he was a top 1 percentile. And so they wrote stories about that. And because of the internet, people now know there's a lot of fan fiction out there. But even before the internet became big enough that you could do that, there were people doing it. So my thought for avoiding cliches is to go back to how most people started writing stories in the first place. Make a single change and then base your book around that. So Stephanie Meyer had most of the basic vampire stuff that was already out there, but she brought in sparkliness to explain why they don't go out in daylight. And apart from that, it is pretty much standard vampire stuff, right the way down to the vampires versus werewolves trope. So pick a thing that you want to write about, space battles, vampires, dragons, whatever, and then change something, but keep the rest the same. Because while readers don't like cliched stories, they don't want to be sold something they weren't expecting either. I read broadly and across a lot of genres. I enjoy a lot of different authors. But if I pick up a book that says it's got twists in the tale, and I read them through and only like half of the stories in that collection have, even if they're good stories that I would have enjoyed, I feel that this isn't what I was expecting. It's not great moment. So by making a radical change, but only making one radical change, you're making it fresh and new, and you're keeping as much of the stuff that readers would expect as possible. Is to take your vampire example, if you go back to the original vampire myths and legends, half of them didn't actually drink blood. But if you told a vampire story where the vampires didn't have to drink blood, is anyone today going to go, well, I got this book that was the Vampire series by Vampire Vampireson, and it's really great. And the really big twist that makes it so particularly fresh and new is that they don't drink blood. Or are they going to go, they're not vampires, they don't drink blood, because it's one of the things you expect?
Yeah, I mean, I got comments on my first Bitter End book, my fantasy book, that the evil mages were essentially vampires. And what they do is they grab people and suck the life force out of them. However, if I'd have said that was a vampire book in the product description, people would have gone, no, it's not. They just grab people and suck the life force out of them. Even though essentially they're doing the same thing. In order for them to keep living, they're sucking the life out of other people. That would have gotten a lot of hate. Yeah. Or if you said steampunk and there wasn't, like my book has some modern technologies in it, and some people have said it's steampunk, but it's not a steampunk story.
Yeah, I would definitely say it was fantasy. Potentially Renaissance fantasy rather than medieval fantasy. But yeah, you couldn't hang any other primary genre on it, really.
No, I mean, and that's kind of the trouble it's had, that series, because it's got a lot of ideas in it. It's, as you say, it's not one twist, it's not one idea away from what people expect. It's 10, which means that you then get people going, well, there's jet engines in this is ridiculous, or these aren't real vampires, they suck magic life force out instead, or whatever. So you get a number of people who are not going to enjoy it no matter what. Whereas other books I've written, like the Kairos Aaron books, because I had a very clear idea, this was a military sci-fi book, like Die Hard, basically, but a science fiction version. It's very clear and that gets a lot more people reading. Like I've had 4 promotions this month that I didn't apply for, so that's pretty good. 4 different sites just featured me on their free book email list without me asking for it on Hard Vacuum. That's never happened on Bite on the Line. So the thing I was going to raise as well was Better Call Saul. I've been watching on Netflix. I won't spoil anything, but there's a character called Mike, and he's a badass who has sworn off violence, which is the most cliched action hero trope possible. Like the guy who is the ultimate killer, but has sworn that he will never kill again, and then gets forced into killing again. Yeah. Yet they take that and they breathe a lot of life into it. From the plot itself is pretty much the same as a lot of other stories, but they've put enough life into the character and into the details of the story that the fact that the overall arc is cliched doesn't really matter. Which I think is the kind of ultimate takeaway for avoiding cliches, is to, in general, like if you write a thriller, there's certain things, certain scenes that are going to go into that thriller. So you have to have a confrontation between the good guy and the bad guy. You have to have the kind of James Bond scene where the bad guy has the good guy in his clutches and tells him his plan, and then the good guy escapes. Like those scenes have to go in to a typical thriller, but you can get into the details and avoid the cliches. I think that's the key, the characters and the details of the plot that really help you avoid cliches. So yeah, I mean, the other thing I'm watching recently on TV is Utopia. I don't know if you've seen Utopia at all, Dave. It's a British series from, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Is that the one about Mr. Rabbit?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah, yes, I've seen that. That is brilliant.
And that's, I won't give anything away, but that's a fairly, I'm only on episode 3, so maybe it changed a lot. But it seems like it's a fairly cliched conspiracy story. But again, the details in it make it entirely original, and like you're kind of taken aback by the twists, or at least I am taken aback by the twists and the mystery in it.
Oh, it's the plot is your standard secret organization, potential government oversight, find the MacGuffin. So it's classic thriller plot. But what they've done is they've got an interesting cast of characters. So it's driven by the characters rather than by the device, which is obviously another way to avoid cliches, that readers want to feel the story. If you're immersed in the story, it doesn't feel cliched because it feels like events are happening and one event leads from another. And to an extent, readers want that I was right moment, particularly in thrillers, crime, mystery, and so on. So you can't be too radical in crime, because there was huge outcry recently because an episode of Midsummer Murders which is on double figures of seasons, didn't actually have a murder in it. And which I think shows how cliched television crime dramas are.
Mm. Oh, I mean, I can't watch them. They're just, for me at least, that's not a particular genre I enjoy. And I look at them and they go, okay, so there's a murder in the first 5 minutes, and then the detective turns up, and the detective looks around and sees something that no one else has seen, and it's just, you know, fun.
And you look at those, and it's even back in the sort of the classic era of it, Miss Marple, Hercule Poirot, and so on. So, very long time ago. The plot was there's a murder. This person with a special talent turns up and solves it. But it's one thread of it's not quite what you expected. Aha, here's a twist. And one thread of here is this interesting character. If you take a Hercule Poirot book and replace Hercule Poirot with another character, it's lost a lot of what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I would say, so as I say, I'm not a fan of the genre of crime. I used to enjoy watching Jonathan Creek because that had a particular twist on, so that avoided the cliche of the murder mystery because there was always a locked room kind of mystery, figure out how the trick worked. And I enjoy the new BBC Sherlock series for a similar reason, that they tend to have some kind of twist on there is usually a murder and Sherlock turns up, but it's usually a twist in the way that the story is told. I was going to say you really have to be aware of your genre when you're tackling cliches. So the self-publishing podcast guys talk about Westerns. So they wrote a series called Unicorn Western. And they said when they'd written it, well, we can't publish this as a Western because Western fans are not going to accept that there's a unicorn. However, fantasy fans will accept that it's a fantasy in a Western setting. So it's two very different genres and two very different sets of readers who will accept very different things. Westerns have to be in the Old West between certain dates. You couldn't, for example, set a Western in, like they had, there was the Nick Cave Western movie set in Australia, and people didn't like the fact that it was in Australia. Well, this isn't a Western, it's not in the US. So even though it tells the same story with the same guns and the same horses and the same everything, if you set it anywhere but the Old West with the expected characters, then that isn't a Western anymore. Whereas fantasy tends to be fairly open. But I would say that for the most part, people want the hero to win in a fantasy story.
Yeah.
Like even Game of Thrones, which goes quite a long way from a usual fantasy, if at the end of it all there isn't a hero that's won, but the zombies kill everyone or whatever it is, people are not going to be very happy with that story. It's okay for a hero to get killed in the middle, but the hero has to win at the end. Someone has to win at the end that's in some way heroic.
Probably, yes. Unless you're in literary fiction. If you're Karagati or whatever, you could probably write a book. So Margaret Atwood, I suspect, could write a book in which it seems like a fight against the zombie horde and then the zombies win because she's got publishers who view her as being literary rather than speculative, and big newspapers will write about her turning of the fundamental tropes on their head to reveal the what's-me thingamy of society. And fantasy fans will go, but it's a fantasy book where the hero loses.
Yeah, I mean, or in crime, you can sometimes have the villain win. I mean, Hannibal, obviously, Lecter, has won in some of the books, in that he's escaped scot-free.
He's the protagonist of the books, really. He's if not one of the protagonists of the book. So I think the rule has to be the protagonist has to win. Because there have been films where the zombie wins, but the zombie wins by being a person rather than a mindless, shambling threat. So evil can triumph if it's personalized evil. So you think about Fight Club. That's a movie about terrorists succeeding.
Yeah, or I was thinking about Dexter.
Dexter, yeah. Well, he's on the borderline. Isn't he doing it, at least to begin with? I haven't seen everything, to deal with people who've escaped the legal system.
Yeah, he is. I mean, then it differs between the books and the TV show. So in the TV show, then it gets to the stage, at least I've watched up to series 6 or 7 or whatever it is, where he is covering up evidence in order that he can then murder the person. So at the start, he's like, well, the cops didn't catch this person, or the chain of evidence wasn't correct, so they had to let him go or whatever. So therefore, I'll kill him. But by the stage I watched to, at least, it was then the cops are about to catch this guy. I'll make sure they don't, so I can kill him. Which is a kind of an important arc for the Dexter character in the TV show. In the books, he's quite different. I only read the first 2, I think, maybe 3. And then it starts getting into magic and that kind of stuff, and it's not as interesting. Which then again is I'm normally fine with magic, but when I'm reading a crime story like Dexter, I'm like, yeah, don't get the magic in. I don't want magic in this story, because this is not what I'm expecting.
Yeah, you can't go too far from where you started.
Like, what I always get annoyed by in certain series is that they will, so it's fine to have people believe in religion, but in certain series where they pray that something will happen, or they believe that they've seen a prophecy or heard from God or whatever, if that then comes true, like if they actually have God, the religious powers is a true thing, in a story that's otherwise realistic, I'm instantly turned off. Whereas if it's a story where it's made clear from the start that this is a story about, actual heavenly powers being manifest on Earth, that's quite different. So yeah, I think you have to be careful when avoiding cliches, that you're not coloring outside the lines of the expectation of the genre you're in, the expectation of the kind of story you're writing. But within those lines, you can do all kinds of things. And one thing I was going to say, it's barely related at all. But one thing I've noticed, both in watching Utopia and watching Better Call Saul, is not to underestimate the power of the reader or viewer having questions in their mind. So I was featured on the Writership podcast a few months ago, and they mentioned that in reading The Bite of Rust, that it had more questions than it had answers in the first chapter, and that's something they appreciated. And that's kind of resonating more and more as I go on, that you want to have more questions than answers for the reader, because then they're going, oh, well, what is going on? Who is that person, or what is that thing, or whatever it happens to be? So yeah, I think, take it back to Cliches, it's about working out what the expectations are, and then figuring out another option, I guess, another way that you can kind of fall into the cliche without, hitting it dead on the nose.
Mm.
And then again, there's certain cliches that just should be avoided now. Like if there's a group of friends against a conspiracy, having one of the people be a traitor, a double agent, is a terrible cliche at this stage. It's just been done to death. Like getting to the end of a story and it was the sidekick who was actually the arch villain all along. It's a cliche that's best avoided. So yeah, was there anything else on cliches you had, Dave?
I think so, no.
Okay. Well, we can probably end a little early this time around rather than droning on for another 15 minutes.
It's been half an hour.
Yep. So, as we mentioned back in the first episode, we're going to try and keep these under 45 minutes. Occasionally we'll be shorter even than that. So, was there anything you wanted to mention before we sign off?
Don't think so, no. I'm good.
Okay. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
All right.